I gotta imagine that if you're across the street, you're okay. If you're in the same apartment building or below the guy, something like that, or in the same power circuit, and I don't want to give away the video because it's really good, but there's some industrial espionage about stealing other companies' dielectric, and maybe a company made a big batch of dielectric. Yeah, and I would also do the breadboard thing where you experiment. Like when I started with electronics myself was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm still pretty new at it, obviously. I had hurt my neck and blew out a disc in my neck, so I couldn't work on cars anymore. Hey, I'm Dave. Welcome to ShopTalk. Today we're going to jump straight into viewer questions, so I'll go straight to my co-host Glenn, who prepares all the questions for us each time. I'm on a different camera today. You'll notice that. It's just my external monitor quit working 10 minutes before the show, so we decided to just have my voice crack and do whatever happens when you're almost live. So I'll turn it over to Glenn. What do you got, Glenn?
What do I got? Oh, well, Dave, let's talk about smoking some refas.
Smoking some refa? Okay.
Sorry. Well, we'll jump in. Yeah. So the Magic Smoke episode there. So John Braze starts us off. Reefer capacitor? No wonder there's so much smoke.
Yeah, I tried that as a pun in the title. I had one smoking reefa, and then I had to let the magic smoke out. I ran them as an A/B test, and I got 52% of the clicks came in through the I let this magic smoke out versus 47 or something on the other one. So I decided to go with the magic smoke one. But I did test the I'm smoking reefa or it's smoking reefa or something like that effect. Did not do as well. So
yeah, it's interesting too. So you talk about so YouTube, I guess, lets you try two thumbnails
three,
and titles.
Actually.
Oh, okay, and then it reports back. So you've been doing that for quite a while, and there's been comments 2 and 4 against some things, things. Yeah, but every time I ask you about it, it seems like the response is very close. Typically,
it is because I've run ones that I genuinely don't know which one will do best, and then I got pretty good sense, I think, and so they're often very competitive with one another. If there's something I don't think will do well, I don't test it because I can't afford to lose the views. So
yeah. Okay, Flying Shutters adds that. Well, what did you expect? Call something a reefer, and it's bound to let out some magic smoke.
Refa, not reefer. Puff the magic capacitor.
What? Sorry, what is it?
Puff the magic capacitor.
Oh, no. I thought you were. I was already skipping to the next question. I thought you were telling me what RIFA stood for. I'm like, yeah, that's important information. Puff the magic.
Replace capacitor immediately. Fire assured.
There you go. Yeah. Boom, boom. Apple iMac dude. What are you? Oh, he's got the emphasis on the wrong syllable here. What are you smoking?
Me? Nothing.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Magic smoke. Derpy 1969. How did you not check the refa cap before powering up?
I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted now. But 1 out of every 4 machines will have a problem, and the rest will generally run indefinitely if they've survived that first 24-hour period. So I generally just turn them on, run them, and while I'm present, I don't leave the machines running when I'm not around. And I admit that if they survive the first couple of days, then I trust them. Otherwise, I go through and I replace whatever blows up. But I should probably replace everything prophylactically as a prophylaxis, if that's the right word.
Proactively? Is that?
Well, proactively as a prophylaxis is prophylactically. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm not certain.
I'm looking at a more narrow definition or portion of the definition of prophylactic, which is probably throwing me off.
There you go. So yeah, that would be the smart move, but no, I don't always do it.
And we'll get into some of that. There's some questions about some of those things too, replacing them and that. So we'll get into some of that. Magic Boderham at 9 minutes, 12 seconds. How can you detect electrical noise?
You can take an old television, turn it on and see what happens, and then go next door to your neighbor who has a ham radio and say, how are things working? And I'm sure there are more formal and professional ways to test, but those are the 2 things that really matter, I think.
Okay. Any so again, the ham radio one for me, there was a guy across the street. That's where I got my first experience with the Commodore PET computer, the ham operator guy. So how close or far away? What's the distance that these refa?
I gotta imagine that if you're across the street, you're okay. If you're in the same apartment building or below the guy, something like that, or in the same power circuit, then I could see it. But if you're just connected to the same power transformer, I don't think you're going to be able to inject noise across the street. I don't know. Not an engineer, but
a next door neighbor in a standard sort of 50 foot wide lot, you're probably not going to get much interference from your next door neighbor, or if you're a ham radio
That's
operator?
my completely non-professional intuition. Yeah.
Okay.
That's my guess.
Yeah. But you definitely don't want to be a ham radio operator and have some leaky refas while you're trying to talk
Not
to
in
your
your
buddies.
own house. Yeah.
Okay. That's just for my own information.
Yeah.
Joe or Jew Mispltic. It's a lot of no vowels in the last name there, so I messed it. 937. The window LED going out for half a second. Is there some old refa there too?
No. So occasionally, you can't see them right now, but when I do the normal show, there's the 3 colored windows behind me, and they are run by software called Night Driver, and they actually receive color packets over Wi-Fi, and they buffer about 10 seconds into the future. And so if they can survive dropouts in the Wi-Fi, but only up to about 10 seconds, because I'm using really old chips that have like 512K with no SD RAM or SPI RAM. As a result, any longer dropouts in the Wi-Fi or something going weird with the network, they will stop getting color data and they will just turn white. And I could probably be smarter and say just hold the last color, but I always kind of wanted to know when it happens. And so you too see when it happens live, because I don't see it behind me usually. Right. So I edit it out where it's convenient, but otherwise I usually can't. So.
And I don't pay a lot of attention to that, but the times that I do remember it happening, it always seems to be the window closest to you.
Yeah, that is definitely the oldest of the chips. It's a Heltec Wi-Fi Kit 32 or something. It was like one of the first chips I bought. That was one of the first projects I did, and it's still alive since then. So
okay, cool. Papas Dino, almost as much fun as having a tantalum cap fail catastrophically. Never have been able to return the magic smoke to its rightful owner. Oh well, Dave, are you a ham?
I am not a ham. I knew a guy in my old hometown, and it was cool because if they had ham radios in their car or whatever the private band radio is, it's like a ham radio that you put in a car. It may have its own name. They all had their own license plates. It was VE5, and then whatever their number was for their ham radio or some shortened version of it.
I always thought like the initials of their name or something. I thought it
Maybe
was.
That's what it was, yeah. But it always was VE5 for some reason, and then ham radio number. So at least, and I should mention too, because I don't have a teleprompter action going on right now. If I'm staring down here, it's because I'm looking at the video of Glenn, and back up here is the camera. So I'm not staring into space.
Yeah, so we're led to believe. Yeah, that's okay.
Yes.
We'll go with that for now, Dave. Your secret safe with, yeah, it's not.
All of us.
Anders J. Jensen. Buildzoid over at Actually Hardcore Overclocking educates me on exploding components on new hardware, and Dave educates me on exploding components on old hardware. Who will educate me on exploding components on middle-aged hardware?
Ooh, I just saw a video on it by, what's the channel? I watch it all the time. It's got a weird name. It's like Asianometry. I'll try to put a link in the video description, but I think it's Asianometry. And he focuses mostly on Asian issues, but it's a cool, interesting tech channel, so I watch a lot of it. And he just did a video on what happened to all the capacitors in the 2000s. And I don't want to give away the video because it's really good, but there's some industrial espionage about stealing other companies' dielectric, and maybe a company made a big batch of dielectric that didn't have all the right chemicals in it, and it became common in capacitors that then failed a couple of years later. And it's a good video, so go check it out.
Maybe that happened.
That's part of the story. It's a much bigger story.
Allegedly, it's part of the story, maybe.
What are you, in the capacitor business? Did they get to you too, Glenn? Big capacitor got to you?
I was just going to say big capacitor, yeah. Preston Givens. Hey, Dave. Everyone needs good war stories. Great tips on refas. Yes, they stink to high heaven. Here's a related question. If you bring up an old piece of gear on a Variac, at what point will they blow?
Really depends on what the voltage rating of the device is and how degraded it is. You know, if you've got a 250 volt refa cap, it should take 250. It should probably take 260. I don't know what the margins are on those. I assume it's more than 10 or 20 volts. But the problem is once they've been exposed to some moisture, that it really accelerates their degradation, and they'll degrade anyway because they're organic just over time. And so they will at some point no longer take 240 volts. So what you turn the Variac up to will really depend on how old and aged that particular capacitor is. But if it's got any degradation, it'll be less than its rating.
Okay. T.S. Brownie, here we get into it. So what do you replace them with?
Oh, brand new ones, but the modern ones are a different technology. I think they're aluminum instead of paper. And they work much better and they tend not to fail. So
Yeah. And the ones that are made outside of North America are from aluminium. Is that right?
I don't know where they're all made. One's like Wima, so I assume it's a German name, Vima, and Panasonic makes them. I think Panasonic is Taiwanese. I'm not sure, but maybe you can buy Texas Instruments capacitors or something. I have no idea, but
So they're made with aluminum or aluminium, whichever you. Hello, I am Chuck.
Hello,
the
Chuck.
person who asked the question is I'm not. But would a follow-up video or videos showing how to source a replacement and replace the blown capacitor be interesting?
It might, but I think that's been done a few times, and it really comes down to I'm going to unsolder 2 poles, negative and positive, and then I'm going to resolder it in 2 poles. And what do you do for the other 13 minutes? You kind of talk about refas. So if anything, I should have done that in my refa episode as just a little montage or something, but be hard to make a whole episode out of it. But I'm sure, Adrian's Digital Basement, something like that could probably do a good job.
And so as a result of that, the most recent Magic Smoke in the episode, are you planning on replacing any of your capacitors on your other equipment or newer or next version of equipment, or has it changed your pattern or behavior or procedure?
Not on the equipment that's proven to be pretty stable.
Yeah.
So if it ran for a long time, I assume it's going to continue. I don't find that they will blow up randomly or 3 months into their service when you turn them back on. They'll fail in the first day or two, or first hour or minute. So
this problem then is
not a guarantee, but
right. Yeah, absolutely guaranteed. Not a guarantee. So this issue then is more related to a period of non-use, is it? It's from sitting around and getting some humidity. And,
it's not from non-use. In fact, use is probably harder on them because they're usually in power supplies where they get heat cycled, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. The problem is any cracks in the case let moisture in, any imperfections in the plastic let moisture in, and that accelerates it. And so they get to a point where they can no longer take the voltage, and that is a function probably that is accelerated by use, but still happens over time.
So it's mostly age. So again, you've got some that if they work in the first 10, 15 minutes or a couple of days, I trust them, they'll be fine. But those really at any time could
still go.
Yeah. Okay. But it tends to show up more often after it's been plugged in for the first time, sort of.
Let's reduce it to a really simple metric and say that this voltage level that the cap is able to take was, when it was brand new, was 280 volts, and it's rated for 240. And then over time, it's fallen to 240. And I turn it on and it works for 3 weeks. And then it falls to 239 and it blows up. Well, I don't have 240 volts, but it blows up at the right point. So I think that's a fairly unlikely scenario, but you certainly could avoid it by going through and replacing them in advance. So.
Yeah. Christopher Bertraw, could normal electrolytic capacitors be used in their place? And other than sacrificing some authenticity?
I don't think so, but there are modern replacements that you can use that are safe and effective. So I don't think an electrolytic fits in that application. Again, not an engineer, but it's probably different in terms of the amount of surface area in the capacitor.
Not an engineer. Have you seen that guy's channel? Not an engineer?
No.
Oh,
I have not.
Yeah, check it out. Yeah, check it out. It's pretty entertaining. Yeah, it's an Australian dude. I find it, very entertaining. Seems
cool.
like an
I'll check it out.
Interesting dude. Random bits. Sorry, what was that?
I said not an engineer. I just re-saying the name.
Yep, not an engineer. Random bits. Seems to be a common thing, caps in general failing. Are there other components in retro gear that are common points of failure to the same degree as capacitors, or?
Well, certain electrolytic capacitors in addition to refa capacitors, but they're all just capacitors. The little ceramic discs ones, they're probably good forever, I think. But the electrolytic, anything that contains an electrolyte is eventually probably going to have some degradation. And that's what we found over time anyway.
Yeah, and Big John says, Dave, have you ever toasted a selenium diode? That's a memorable stink.
I don't know that I have. I've smoked a diode, but I don't know what kind it was. And I don't remember a memorable smell. So
and that's not a euphemism, right?
Yes, I don't smoke electronics into my body. No. At least I try not to, because I don't know if they're bad for you, but the refa cap smell is pretty gross.
Well,
if you get a big whiff of it.
That's sort of a Darwin-y kind of thing, or some sort of survival, where like typically if something smells bad or tastes bad, it's probably because it's bad for you, right? So
yeah, and this smells like old fish, so it's not a great smell.
yeah, I mean, if it's properly pickled or something, maybe you can. Anyway, selenium. I don't even know what selenium is or what kind of diode it would be in. Is that something that's still
It's an
currently
element,
being
138
used?
on the period. What? I said it's an element.
138
on the periodic table? Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Check it out. Call me wrong.
Not a guarantee. Rye lore. Isn't there some capacitor refresh procedure you're supposed to do? I think it's for electrolytic ones, he says.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so there is a
so you can
process
take a
for those.
big electrolytic cap and you can reform it somehow by slowly incrementing the voltage in it so it doesn't fail, but then retrain it to be good again. And I don't claim to understand it, but it applies to electrolytics, and generally the big ones are the ones you care about, I guess.
Yeah, not an electrical engineer. John Burgess, following your pro tip by replacing suspect or all refa caps as the first step may deprive you of much excitement. Therefore, build a capacitor test bench. Have a fire extinguisher and exhaust fan nearby. Then put on your protective eyewear, stand back, watch, and apply power just to the caps. If everything goes well, as in no smoke, connect the setup to a Variac and increase the voltage until they do blow up. After all, that's why you're plugging them in anyway, right? And you weren't going to reuse them anyway, so have some fun.
But why then the Variac? Why not just blow them up with maximum power right away? Just hook them up to 240, whatever they need, whatever it takes.
And
transformer.
Chuck in a couple selenium ones and pull the labels off so you can't tell them apart, and then pay like Beer Hunter or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you can tell by the smell which one went first.
Yeah. First one to hit the smelly ones out. Yeah. David Kelly, are these things common in vintage stereos?
I don't know. I've got a bunch of Pioneer stereo equipment. I'm kind of an old Pioneer stereo guy, and I'm trying to remember if I've ever replaced them. I've never had one fail, and I don't remember replacing any, but you would think, especially in audio electronics, they would want to limit noise on the AC mains. So I'm going to say, yeah, maybe. That's my best guess.
Old TVs, old radios?
I think they're pretty common in most power supplies that have large loads. Yeah.
Okay. There you go. Okay. AIV-IS is organic material is fully encapsulated in atom level. Will it still degrade?
Atom level. I assume, let's see. Like
atomic level?
Assuming it's like hermetically sealed or something. Yeah, it still will. It probably won't do it as fast because the oxygen and the liquid causes it to oxidize, I think. But it'll still do it. So over time, it's like if you take food, you can irradiate it. I've seen this where they take a bag of chicken, irradiate it, and store it for 30 years, and they open the bag, and the chicken's gray, but it's fully edible because it has had no biological contamination or decomposition. None of that is set in it because they, cobalt 60 blasted it. But it still had the chemical processes of 30 years, so it probably doesn't have the same texture that you're expecting.
Whoa, yeah, I can imagine the texture is going to be off.
Yeah, I bought a bunch of MREs, meals ready to eat, back around 2001 for obvious reasons. And then I would refresh them and replenish them, but I opened up a case that was probably 15 or 20 years old. I'd kept them in the third tier just in case pile, and then they got retired to the garbage pile. And I'm like, let's see what they look like. And I opened some of the food, and there's pudding in there, and it's still probably technically edible, but it doesn't have the right consistency anymore. The colors are sometimes wrong, and so
which unless you are in a disaster situation and sort of that is your only means of food, you just choose not to eat it. And
if there's been a nuclear war and you're down to your third food stash, that's when you're eating it, but not before then. And
the bugs start to look edible at some certain point too. So,
they're fresher.
I ain't starting with the bugs though. Moonrock. I have working but rarely booted PCs that I built in the 2000s. So I hope that the power supplies in them don't have any refa caps. Could someone tell me if refas were still being used in that decade?
I don't think so, but now you face the other capacitor issue, the dielectric issue, and that is common in the 2000s machines. So even I've got motherboards here that are like 2003 from my old company to run the original servers, and I would probably have to go through and check all the caps on them before powering them up.
So you would use that other procedure then of sort of restoring them or prepping them so they don't blow up?
No, I would just look at them and see if they're oozing or swollen or anything looks weird. That's literally what you look for. Like they ooze out some of the dielectric, or you know, the top swells up, and there's little vents on the top usually, and you can see stuff coming out of there.
I thought we were segueing into a first aid training session or something.
No, it sounded like it, but no.
Randall Davis, can we get now we're into we've moved on to the ShopTalk one now, the retro games and the PDP-11 and other sorted stuff. Randall Davis says, can we get an AI to code to NASA or clean code assertion secure coding methods?
You probably can. I would think if you gave it the list of restrictions, it would try to adhere to them to the same extent that I could say you can only use K and RC when I have it generate code for the PDP-11. I'm sure it can follow whatever reasonable standards. If it's a super complex standard, then no. But
Matt E3S2K. It's numbers and letters. Hey Dave, at what age do you think is the right time to tell your kid they have autism? My son is 6, was diagnosed with ASD level 1 at age 3, but we haven't yet told him. He said he'd like for him to know more about himself, but he's not sure he'd really understand it yet due to the communication difficulties. Maybe it's better to tell him before he fully understands it. You only have one chance at the first time, so we want to do it right. No pressure. But let's say you just sort of would like your perspective, I guess. So.
Yeah, I thought about it a number of times. I was diagnosed when I was like 50 something. And so would I have liked to have known sooner? Yeah. But how much sooner would I have liked to have known? And the thing is, there wasn't much they could do for you in the 1970s or, when I was a kid. So there wouldn't be much benefit in me knowing other than me then saying, oh, I can't do that because I have autism. And so I'm afraid I would have used it as a crutch had I known it as a young kid. So I think that's a bit of a danger. But when there are services and interventions that are available that will help you better deal with the fact that you have autism, then you want to identify it so you can get those interventions and treatments. So it's a question of how soon is knowing actually useful. And I would say for me, when you want to know is when you're having an interference fit with the world. So you don't get along socially, or other kids are picking on you because you think different and think different things are funny than they think are funny. Stuff like that. So when the kid starts having problems, maybe then it's time to have the talk and say, look, you're wired a little different. And so your expectations of what the social interactions should or are going to amount to is different than what they have. And here's how to try and compensate or accommodate for it or get along to go along or whatever you want to do, or fight back or whatever the situation is. But at some point, you don't want to just think, yeah, I'm a weirdo, right? You got to say, no, you're not weird. You're different and you're wired with certain abilities and other possible deficits that come as part of a big package. So that's great. So his son is 6. He says he has some communication difficulties. So those are his age, and the communication stuff would be a factor. I think there's probably also something there where it's not necessarily a flipping the switch of, okay, you're not flipping the switch, but like, if he doesn't know, you don't, I think just all of a sudden say, okay, today's the day. Hey son, by the way, you're autistic. Da, 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 da. But more of the thing like, hey, you're wired different, or you have this, or I think you can sort of work your way. Sounds like you work your way towards it, sort of commensurate with the child's sort of capacity to understand at that point or that level. That's probably another little piece that. Yeah, and you want to not convey that, you're defective because you're made different. What it is everybody's made different, but most people are, 90% of the population is made a particular way, and 10% is made a different way that is useful in different scenarios. So,
yeah, that's right. We're all,
and that's hard to explain to a 6-year-old, but
yeah, there's some ways you can start to talk about it, but not necessarily label it or name it, and yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll know when it becomes relevant based on how it interferes with the world.
Torque software. So 5 seconds in. What is that LCD board at the top of the bench? Not sure.
That's probably the 5-panel mesmerizer.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
So that's also part of the. Oh, go ahead.
It wasn't on, was it? Or you haven't had that on for a while, have you?
Might have been on when I was blowing up the refa
Okay.
caps. Because that's where the PDP was sitting. So I think that's where he saw it. So it's a 5 by 30, well, 5 by 64. So I can't do that math. 380 in my head. I don't know, whatever it is. Lots of pixels wide and then 32 tall. And it's running the night driver software that, again, broadcasts LED, but instead of just saying a solid color fill of yellow like the windows, you can draw to it like a matrix. And so it draws a star field effect and then sends it to the matrix 30 times or 60 times a second, depending on how it's configured, and the sign renders away. So I'm going to do an episode on it pretty shortly. So make sure you subscribe to Dave's Garage, which you probably already are if you're watching this. And make sure you're subscribed to this. And please tell a friend if you enjoy it, because we're trying to grow this and it's a slow go. So we'd appreciate any kickstarting you can do on our behalf.
Or tell them if you think they would enjoy it, regardless of whether or not you're enjoying it. But enjoy it.
Just assume you enjoy it and tell everyone.
Sly Seth. How do I get into repairing vintage electronics?
Ooh, you know what I would do?
Uh-oh.
I would buy like old broken Commodore 64s, and then I would sit down and I would binge watch Adrian's Digital Basement. But I would just watch the Commodore 64 episodes, because he does a number of repairs. And by the time you've seen 10 Commodore 64 repairs, like I was a Commodore 64 tech in the 80s, a Commodore dealer. And by the time you've done 10 or so of them, there's like 3 or 4 common problems. PLA and the PIO or PIA chips come up all the time. And you start to learn the common ones. Now he goes into some more esoteric, complicated repairs that are also good. But I think if you just kind of follow along with what he does and start with an old, I don't want to say they're worthless, but a dead Commodore 64 motherboard is not worth a lot of money. So you can afford to get one, get some basic tools, make some basic mistakes, and hopefully, bring it back to life. Plus, it helps to have a couple dead ones, so you can say, well, I need this chip from this one and that chip from that one.
Yeah, you got a bit of a pool of parts to draw from. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also do the breadboard thing where you experiment. Like when I started with electronics myself was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm still pretty new at it, obviously. I had hurt my neck. I blew out a disc in my neck, so I couldn't work on cars anymore. So I needed a hobby where I could come out to the shop and tinker for like 30 minutes and then go back and recover and stuff. And I found that, breadboarding, really simple circuits, plugging them in and then setting up transistors to switch an LED and blink it, stuff like that with a 555. That kind of thing was really good too. So it's something I would also tinker with.
My wife is, I'm not an electrician. My wife knows nothing about electronics, all that sort of stuff. And she works she's working with kids who have various on the spectrum and various issues, learning issues, I guess. And she's got a couple of students now she's working with, and they're doing some electronic stuff. So she's going, oh yeah, I'm on this. I can't remember the name of the website, but she's doing electronics with these kids.
Oh, okay.
And building electronic circuit boards and testing them. And she's getting lights to light up. And she's just like thrilled by this. And I'm like, well, shit, I can't do that. And then she's like, oh, and pretty soon we're going to get these kits. So we're going to, what do they call those things with all the little, I'm like, a breadboard? Yeah, breadboards. And I'm like, well, holy cow. I'm just like, how did that happen? So had no interest in it, no knowledge of it, but she had to do it to help some kids. So she got into it and she's having a blast.
That's cool. Yeah. You didn't know until she tried it, I guess.
Doing electronics. And again, I think in terms of doing it online with this, and there's probably 10 different places you can do that stuff. You don't need to worry about magic smoke or hurting yourself because it's all in the thing, but you can learn and test stuff and try things and then do it physically. So that's, I think if he's trying to learn vintage electronics, there's lots of nice tools to do it. But that Commodore 64, getting a few of them and having bits and pieces to draw from, pretty neat way to do it. Nice. Jason White. I have a topic that you might be able to explain, which would help out a lot of sysadmins. Why does Microsoft make it near impossible to programmatically pin apps to the taskbar in Windows 11? Even with PowerShell, there's no options. Is this a shift to get you to sub to Azure, or is it a limitation of the new UI design?
Well, I've been gone over 20 years, so it's hard for me to know what they're thinking today, but I would guess that it's probably just a user scenario. They don't get enough. Maybe there's 3% or 5% of the people that passionately want to be able to pin things to their taskbar, or maybe it's an Apple patent for all I know. But I would guess it's just consumer demand. If they thought everybody wanted it, they would probably add it. But right now they're working on Copilot stuff.
So what is he talking about? Like, I mean, I've got all kinds of stuff pinned to my taskbar and I don't have any problem doing it. Is he talking about like an application being to pin itself to the taskbar?
Maybe he wants to create them programmatically with PowerShell or something.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So you could write a C++ stub, like a little stub that just goes create instance and gets the whatever it is, shell context menu handler, whatever it is. I can't remember at this point, but and then talks to the Explorer and does the actual pinning for you. You could do it that way, and so you should be able to do it in a script like, Visual Basic for applications in Office or something like that. Invoke the shell object model. In theory. Sounds easy.
Not a guarantee.
But it's not.
Yeah. Sounds easy, but it's not. Yeah. Data to the zero. Sweet video, Dave. Direct memory reading is both the correct solution and a little bit of cheating. The AI gets more precise data than us mere human players. But we humans have one little trick up our sleeves that AI could copy, and that's prediction. We don't just make reactionary inputs, we tend to know what the results of those inputs will be. So may I suggest trying your hand at having the AI make predictions of what its inputs will lead to and then picking the correct outcome. So this generally leads to both faster training and much more capable AIs in the end.
Rest assured, that's what I'm trying to do. So I have two modes. I have behavioral cloning, where it looks at what the demo mode of the game is doing, scores that, and then ranks it in the model. But there's no feedback because it can't tell the game what to do at that point. And then when you put in a quarter and hit start, it switches automatically to reinforcement learning, which goes through and watches what you do, ranks each frame 60 times a second, scores it, feeds it to the model, predicts what it should do, and then does that. And then some decaying percentage of the time, it falls back and says, well, what would the behavioral cloning model do in this case? And does that. Most of the time, it's trying to predict what it should do with the reinforcement learning model. So it is, in fact, doing pretty much what you describe, I think. Doesn't mean it works yet. It's not there yet, but that's the plan.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a bit about sort of where it's at or what you're...
Yeah, it works well. It just looks like a drunken monkey playing Tempest at this point. So all the control inputs work. The model runs. It kind of learns. The error rate goes down a little bit over time, but it's not learning very fast. So I think I've still got some fundamental bugs in the code on the Python side that are preventing it from learning properly, because the numbers from logging aren't impressive yet. But it is playing and it is trying. That's all I know at this point.
Like a drunk monkey.
I'm going to have to make an episode eventually. It's going to probably wind up being a 2-part episode. So when you see the big episode and you get like 13 minutes in, you go, hey, there's no way he's going to wrap this up in 2 minutes. That's because I can't in 15 minutes. There's too much. So it's probably going to be a 2-parter.
And what's that other, someone said if you get enough monkeys on enough typewriters, eventually they'll spit out something legible, or I don't know, some sort of... Yeah,
they'll type all the works of Shakespeare.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
It'll take some time though.
Yeah. You got to incentivize the monkeys properly and all kinds of shenanigans. Richard Black, how do you get the AI to turn the knob on Tempest? Do you bypass the knob and electronic input in the inputs?
Yeah, so the way the spinner works on Tempest is a little separate hardware circuit, and it counts the number of shutter windows that go positive or negative past the sensor each frame in between times you ask it. And so it takes that number, which is an 8-bit number, and it drops it into a spinner accumulator. Then it adds it to the spinner delta. Then it adds that to the spinner accumulator to figure out the spinner position each frame. So what I do is when I'm controlling the game, I just wait, and at the beginning of the frame, I poke into memory the value of the spinner input that I want to input into the spinner delta. It sees that, goes, okay, adds it to the spinner delta or to the spinner accumulator, and winds up moving the player that way. So that's kind of how that works.
So it's a direct input to what it would be getting from the spinner if you're not actually spinning the spinner.
I'm not 100% sure why it works, because it reads the hardware register and then deposits with change that it sees. But I've already put a value there, but you think it would get overwritten by the game, but it doesn't seem to. Maybe I don't know. Now I'm kind of curious, but it works, so I'm not going to mess with it.
But maybe there's something there and it could work better if it was done differently.
Oh, I know what it is. Oh. What it's expecting is that the memory address where I'm doing it is preloaded by the hardware, and I replace the value that the hardware put there. So it's a hardware register, and I'm just saying, well, when you look at this address, lie and say you got this value instead. So,
Lord Chariot, Just got 2 jet KVMs. Would like to know your thoughts on it too. And I think you said you're going to do an episode on that or a short? Or
I probably will, yeah.
Okay.
I've got one. Actually, I've got a couple here, and I'm pretty impressed with it, so I'll probably wind up doing an episode on it. I've got another one that I was waiting on a firmware update that I want to compare it to do kind of a comparison episode, and it wasn't doing well, the other one, so I wanted to wait until it got a little further baked.
Is that a different one from the one that you said someone sent you to review and you tried it and it wasn't really good, so you don't want to do that one, or is that the one
I
you're
wrote to them and I said,
okay.
well, what's going on with this aspect? Right. Like, there was 2 things I didn't like. One, you have to sign up for a cloud account in order to connect to your own KVM. That's not going to change, so that's a bad knock against it in my mind. The other one was I couldn't auto-discover where it was, so I couldn't connect to it. And they said, oh, that's been fixed in the latest firmware, so I've got to update the firmware and try it again.
Yep, cool. Captain Mulch 1. The C language was originally written on a PDP-7? No?
That's possible. I don't actually know. That sounds right. I know Unix was on a PDP-11, but the C language probably started much earlier than that. I'm surprised, though, because they aren't that far apart in lineage, so why one would be on the 7 and the other on the 11, I don't know. So
is that like
I guess
a 3-year
my official
gap?
answer is no, it's a lot more than that, I think.
It is, okay.
You may have only had access to old hardware to write a compiler on or something.
Yeah.
So
backwards compatibility. Philosophizer. Philosophizer. Oh, geez, I split it into 2. It's Philosophizer. I tried to break that into 2 names. I just kind of split them so I can help my pronunciation, and I forced that one. Sorry, Philosophizer, with F's, no PH or D. Have you ever heard of The Hacker's Diet, written by John Walker, founder of Autodesk?
No, I've never heard of that.
Now you have, from the Philosophizer.
Okay, does it give me any information on what it is or not?
No. Seems like he's just maybe it's not even a suggestion. Maybe it is just a pure question, to which the answer
Hacker's
is no.
Diet?
Yeah.
A lot of cigarettes and coffee?
Chicken nuggets. Another one here, Paul Scarlett. Question, do you have any DECUS tapes? DECUS? DECUS? DECUS tapes? DECUS? DEC user conference tapes are a collection of programs and utilities for the various operating systems of the day. RT, RTE, RSTS, RSX11, VMS. He says he got his first C compiler for RSX from one of those tapes. So DEC user
I don't think so.
I've got
a batch of TK50 tapes, about a dozen of them, and they got random DEC things on them. So it's possible some of them are, but I haven't looked that closely to know precisely what's on them. I've just been trying to get the tape drive to work and have had no luck so far.
So you may have. Look for a DEC user conference tape or a DEC US. New York Babs. Question, Dave, can you explain the load, quote, star, quote, comma 8, the load star, comma 8, comma 1 from the Commodore 64? I remember those were some games that only did load star, comma 8. What was the general difference? Comma 8,
was that comma 1?
Yeah.
So when you just do comma 8, it says load this program and put it at the base address of wherever basic memory starts, because it's a basic program. So if it was written on the PET, which has basic memory start at like 400, it'll still work. Whereas on the C64, I forget, 800, I think. And so they're different, but a basic program will work on either, because comma 8 with nothing else after it just says load it from device 8 and put it in memory at the default address. Now, if you had comma 1 at the end of that, it says look at the first 2 bytes of the file to figure out where this file should load and load it there instead. So if you've got some kind of extension that has to be loaded up at C000 and you just did comma 8 on it, well, it's going to reload it down at 0400 or 0800. But if you do the comma 8, comma 1, it will go, C000, and it'll put up at memory in that place. So it was a way of saying pin it to memory when you load it.
So some programs would work under either configuration and others would only work under the comma 8, comma 1.
Basically, basic programs needed to be loaded without the comma 1, and non-basic machine language programs need the comma 1.
And would it just return a syntax? What kind of error would it return if you tried to load it with the incorrect?
So if you loaded a machine language program as just comma 8, it would just be garbage in memory. So when you did a list, you'd get some number and a bunch of gobbledygook.
Yeah. VMAX. What's that animating display thing? Oh, yeah, on the shelf behind him. Above the license plate. Small tablet size has some kind of screensaver running on it. What that?
Yeah, it's not doing anything interesting right now. It's doing the pinwheel effect, but it's very dim. So.
Oh, okay.
That's all right. Keep an eye on it later. Can you change it? All right. So it's a 64 by 32 matrix that runs an ESP32 at 240 megahertz on dual cores with, I think, 8 megabytes of PS RAM, and it does about 30 different effects and weather and news and sports and stocks, stuff like that. You can get them at nightdriverled.com, and I believe they're available on eBay now.
Because you guys, you and your wife boxed up another 50 or something.
They're really intended as dev kits, but you can set it on your shelf and look at it, and it'll do cute things. So you don't have to program it. It comes all pre-programmed. You do have to assemble it a bit. But if you're a C programmer and you have any interest in those kinds of effects, like you can see over Glenn's shoulder there now, it's a fun project. So check it out, nightdriverled.com.
And then, of course, Anonymax UK says, hey, Dave, what's the model of the spiral lamp that you programmed that everyone asks about in the background? He says he lives in China and maybe there's a source for it still. Because I think you did say last time that you had one. You had the original one, and then you bought another one that you still haven't converted, and now you've looked for it and you can't even find it anymore. So,
yeah, you'll see I've got one growing out of my head here. This box here, this tall black box, that's one unopened yet. And I looked at the packaging, and it's called an Arctica Swirl. So I went and I searched online, and Home Depot has them. So perhaps I will do an episode because you actually can buy them. So,
and I think because you and I sort of nudge you about that every now and then, just to sort of try and fulfill my commitment here or whatever, or role. That's not my role, just to be a pest because it gives me something to do. I think you're saying, doing, and we talked to maybe it's more of sort of an episode on how to build that one, but at least as much so just how to take LED strips and find whatever kind of light fixture you want and make a thing.
Yeah.
Right? So we might use that as a model, but make it a more generic thing for folks. But yeah, it's still on the list. We still talk about it, and Shaman's Mystery. Glenn, where can I get one of those shirts? Oh yeah, the one I had, the Smart Alec sort of Matthew one. Probably lots of places, but I didn't buy it. My wife and kids every now and then sort of get me a Smart Alec-y, mathy kind of shirt that they think I will find entertaining, and other people might. And
most of those, the more common ones, are available on Amazon, I find. So
yeah, and I think there's probably like geek shirts. If you search geek shirts or nerd shirts or math shirts, there's all kinds of them that you can get. So I did actually
Geeks Outfit.
There you go. Yeah, I did actually.
Geeksoutfit.com is a place
for that specific one. I just Googled it before we got on today, and I found like 20 different versions of the same text, but none of them were the shirt that I had. So
really?
You can get all different variations of it. Yeah. And I should point out to make sure that people can see your shirt today, Dave, because you got a Smart
2020.
Yeah.
Very bad. Would not recommend.
Yeah. 1 star.
1 star only. Did not like.
That's it. So I got, that's it for the submitted questions. I do have 2 things, if you'll indulge me. One is, last time I mentioned that because we were talking about someone asked about the Jet KVMs, and my only knowledge of the KVM, I just went to the keyboard video monitor switch that I bought and was mentioning, oh yeah, it works fine, except my keyboard keeps shutting off. And W.R. Brower put in a comment that said, hey, your KVM shutting down over time might be the power savings mode of the USB port it plugs into. This can be disabled in Windows Device Manager, or plug an externally powered USB hub into your computer and attach the KVM to that. So it's like, okay. And I'd gone in and tried to look at the power saving stuff and the keyboard, and the option wasn't there. And then just a couple of days ago, I was talking to you and you're like, oh, well, I'll check your root USB hub. And I'm like, yeah, how do I do that? So you walked me through it, found the 2 root USB hubs and disabled the power management stuff. And the thing's been working fantastically.
Oh, it has.
Up until about 17 or 18 minutes ago when you saw me fumble in here because my keyboard disconnected again. So,
oh, look, I'm doing thumbs up here.
It was working totally fine. And I wanted to give props to WR and you for helping me do it. And then the damn thing buggered on me again, or popped off. So it's still not totally done, but I'm still feeling hopeful. The last one, and I have a list in here who the user name comes from. So this one I've said at GH Hodges, which is me. And I think just because we are filming today, and I know they may be watching this. Let's hope so. I just wanted to say happy birthday to Dave's mom.
Oh, yeah.
Today is Dave's mom's birthday.
March 19th, every year.
So you folks won't see this until she's already a couple days past her birthday. But yeah, thought it was appropriate. We're filming today. We should at least acknowledge your mom's birthday. So
yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for doing that.
That's all I got, Dave. Back to you, and you can finish her up and wrap this thing up.
All right. Well, that's all I've got for today. So like I said earlier, make sure you're subscribed and maybe let a friend know about the podcast if you find it interesting in any way. Other than that, we appreciate your viewership, and we'll see you next time right here in Dave's Garage. This little chair will be waiting for one of you, and a rocking chair for another who likes to rock, and a big armchair for two to curl up in. All next time on Dave's Garage.